everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to be interviewing the illustrious Tony Howard, who is the founder of Astrology University. And speaking as someone who is a student at Astrology University, I can testify, firsthand to what an amazing experience it is. It's a place where you can learn many different types of astrology, branches, methods, but also in a very structured, kind of systematic way that doesn't overwhelm you. And it brings together truly the best, like the most distinguished and well-established astrologers out there. So highly recommended. So the topic for this interview is going to be intuition between the tarot and astrology, how intuition might kind of serve as a bridge between the two worlds, right? Before I start, I'd just like to give a very brief bio about Tony. So we already said that he founded Astrology University, and it's based in Boulder, Colorado, and that was in 2012. And he graduated from the University of Colorado with a BA in History and Film, where you know that Mercury is the strongest planet in your chart, and you inferred that, that's why you like to approach astrology with an open-ended attitude, the curiosity of Mercury. And I love that. That's how I approach all learning as well. Okay. And there's this quote from your website that I really love, and I feel like it encapsulates your teaching philosophy as I've experienced it so far as one of your students. And it is, I approach an astrology consultation as a life coach. This means I work with you in partnership to help you find insight or to reach goals and uncover your true desires and sense of purpose. One of astrology's most profound revelations is that we can co-create our lives in harmony with universal principles and energies. As your astrology coach, I can help translate the symbolic language so you can recognize it and work with it consciously. So I really love that because it just like demonstrates how empowering your approach is to teaching astrology, and how your approach to astrology is very much about self-realization and kind of growing aware of those kind of astrological, psychological, archetypal patterns and dynamics that are embodied in us, and how it's our responsibility to kind of change what needs to be changed in them, develop what needs to be developed in them, and kind of mature along with and through the expansion of our awareness of these archetypes, right, and energy fields, right? So that was just beautiful, right? Okay, so what got me interested in this topic is that, as tarot readers, we are constantly encountering astrology in some form or another, whether or not the reading is an astro tarot reading, right? You may, I don't know how much you know about the tarot, but you may know that the most popular version of the tarot in the English-speaking world is the Rider-Waite-Smith version, and that was developed by a secret society called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And they came up with a very kind of systematic method, a systematic kind of set of correspondences between certain cards and certain signs and planets and even elements, right? So you have the 4 suits: cups for water, wands for fire, swords for air, pentacles or coins for earth. And then among the 22 trump cards, you have cards that are assigned to specific planets, specific zodiac signs, specific elements, right? And of course, depending on the type of tarot deck that we're talking about, the correspondences might be different, right? So it's very much kind of ingrained in there. I think, the thing is that what explains that is that the tarot is used and taught both as a way of understanding the world in mythic archetypal terms, right? But also as a way of as a practical system of divination, that might help you kind of figure out what's the best type of job for you to look for example, or what's the best subject for you to study, right? Or how you need to take care of your health, you know? Or if you're doing it for something called dowsing, right? Where is your lost key, you know? So yeah, so it's very interesting because like the tarot it's 78 cards, and if you read with reversals, that gives you a total of 156, let's say, visual symbols, right? But ideally, you should be able to use it to address any possible question, and I mean anything, right? So the way we as tarot readers approach the tarot is that each card, instead of being a set of, let's say, circumscribed meanings, right? Each card represents a core energetic, and as you are kind of doing the reading with the client and having the necessary conversation, right? Then the cards get drawn, and some sort of intuitive translation of the meaning occurs in the process of the energetic exchange between you as the reader and the client, right? It's like a very organic process, but you have to be like consciously receptive to it in order for it to happen, right? So that really kind of it poses an interesting, let's say, question for tarot, you know, in terms of astrology. Like, so when you bring in astrology, when you add astrology into the mix, right, into the whole range of potential meanings for the cards, right? How much are you supposed to rely on intuition? How much are you supposed to rely on kind of codified meanings, you know? Yeah, maybe we can just open with that. Like, in your opinion, and I don't know again how much background you have in the tarot, but just in light of what I've said, like, do you feel there are significant overlap or kind of similarly significant roles for intuition in the reading of, let's say, natal birth charts in astrology, and in the reading of tarot cards for a tarot session?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much for the warm welcome, and it's great to be here, Khalid. So appreciate the invite. Yeah, I think there's definitely overlap. One obvious way is in the sense that the tarot has, you know, each card has an ascribed meaning and a set of potentials, and then depending on how you're drawing the cards and laying them out, there's a little bit of technique and structure there that you're relying on as well. Like you said, if you're using reversals, for instance, you know, that's a technique that you're gonna use for interpretive purposes. But then it's also important at that point, I feel, to open to the field. I think anytime two people come together, there's a healing field that's created, whether you're aware of it or not. When two people come together, there's a counseling dynamic also that's created, whether you're aware of it or not. And if you are aware of it and you open to it and you set intentions around that, you can create a beautiful healing space where magic can happen. and if you do develop or just have naturally some intuitive skills, I do think that technique and intuition go hand in hand in consultations like this with tarot or astrology, where there's a technique that you can rely on. With both astrology and tarot, you could just rely on the technique. You could say, well, the cards are like this, so this is the meaning. And you could tune out or ignore or not be open to intuitive information coming in. And you could hear, I don't know if I should read this card this way. You might hear that voice in your head. Something in me is telling me to say this instead of this thing that I usually say. But if you're technique driven, you might tune that out and just say the thing. And you can do the same with astrology as well.
Okay, so given that so many, well, I guess, yeah, I mean, all of the branches of astrology available today, they have a significant kind of layers of history behind them, and kind of rationales for why you should interpret this planet in this way and another planet in that way and this house in this way, another house in that way, etc. Right? So given that there's so many kind of like reasoning and rationale and theories also, like for example, there's archetypal astrology, and a lot of it might rely on the theories of Jung, and a lot of it might, like if we think of maybe astrologers like Karen Hamacher Zondag, they'll consider that when a planet moves from one sign to another, like the dynamic totally changes, and then any aspects also might be considered or not, for example, right? So given that, like, do you feel like if you are bringing to a consultation a specific type of astrology, let's say, I know you work with many different like branches and techniques, so you wouldn't be that type of astrologer, but let's assume that you were like working within a definite tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that in a reading, when you're trying to bring your craft to the reading, that then the craft itself might impose restrictions on the movement of your intuition?
It could, but it doesn't have to. I work with a kind of open-ended technique toolkit myself, but if I know people who don't and who are very intuitive and weave that in. So let's just say you've got a specific set of parameters or a specific range of meaning for any given symbol, whether it's in the tarot or in terms of astrological symbolism. You set your parameters, and then again, when you're with somebody and you're in that healing space and that healing container's opened up, you're sensitive to and open to this additional layer of information, I want to say, and also meaning. Even if you've got a specific toolkit in astrology or with the tarot or set of techniques, there's still a range of meaning possible with each symbol, and you could describe it differently every time. I'm looking at the cards behind you, and you could describe any one of those cards. If we recorded you doing a session with somebody, you might describe the sun a little bit differently each time. And I think even that is an example of being open to what's in the field, right? And if you're truly open to what's in the field, you may go off script a little bit. And you may allow space for that, even though you've got your whole technique toolkit. I think that, I don't know if I want to call it a mistake, but I think I think maybe a good word is there's a missed opportunity if you are receiving some information to convey something to a client that feels off script to you, and then you deny that because you're so rigid with your toolkit.
That's interesting, because like it's just kind of conjuring in my mind this kind of hypothetical scenario. Let's say like you're a traditional or Hellenistic astrologer, and you go in with really let's say I don't want to say rigid necessarily, but they're set frameworks, and they're based on theory, right? Theories that an ill-dignified Saturn opposing your moon is bad, and it's going to be likely bad for your health, etc. Right? And then you might meet a client, and the client tells you a life story where health maybe hasn't been a big issue. So in that case, I feel like you might be able to draw a parallel between that case and a reading situation where a more intuitive kind of experience of the cards that come up for a client are actually more reflective of their own life experiences, considering that scenario, right, would you say that in general, modern astrology, which seems to lean more towards like mythic correspondences, archetypal paradigms, evolutionary paradigms, would you say that it's naturally more embracing of intuition, the practice of intuition in the reading and delineation, right? In comparison to, let's say, traditional, medieval, or ancient, like Hellenistic astrology?
Yeah, for me, the answer is yes and no, and it really depends on the practitioner. I think that archetypal psychological astrology, it's already kind of open to a creatively interpretive experience, right? Where there's a range of potentials and you're finding the range that's resonant and appropriate for this person in this given moment. But you can easily have the same approach with a traditional toolkit because we're all living in this modern world and experience where even if we don't think that we're practicing psychological astrology, when we're in a consultation with somebody, we all naturally go there a little bit, right? For instance, you might not think that you're like psychologically minded, but you might start talking about your childhood experience and how that shaped your viewpoint right now. And you're in the psychological domain, whether you're acknowledging that or not. And so I think that just by virtue of being in this modern world, now do some people really shut that out and get really linear and rigid with their toolkit? Absolutely. But that's just the nature of certain human beings. And there are psychological astrologers who might do the same thing. You mentioned Karen Hamaker-Sontag earlier, and she has a specific set of criteria, for instance, for what determines a yod aspect pattern, which is a particular, aspect pattern in astrology, configuration between, let's just say, 3 planets minimum. And she's very rigid about what makes it that aspect pattern or not. And so if the criteria don't match for her, it's a no, even if it's just right there on the edge. Whereas for somebody who's a bit less rigid, they may have a little bit more of an expansive set of possibilities, or a little bit of wiggle room in the moment with somebody where, they're listening to the client, they're with the client, they're paying attention, and they're like, boy, it sure sounds like you have a yod, even though it's not, it's really close, but no cigar in terms of the technique. Well, in that moment, the chart and the person and life is telling you something, right?
Yeah.
That in that moment, you're being told your toolkit is too rigid. And here's an example where this totally works, even though it's just outside your parameters. And so you should pay attention to that. And some of us will, and some of us won't.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's great. And it really reminds me of, the way that we do readings, right? Which is based on, and it's a theoretical kind of decision, I guess you could say, that intuition always must trump, and I have trumps behind me, so that's fun. But intuition must trump any kind of codified meanings attached to any card. So if you feel like the card is saying something that's really that you haven't read about, like in connection with this card anywhere before, but if it's really speaking strongly to you at the moment, that's what you should go with, But there's still this idea that every card has a core energetic within it, and then a very vast space where any number of meanings could lie, but somehow mysteriously, if you really understand the core energetic, you can trace a connection between those far outlying meanings and that core energetic,
Right. Yeah. And it's like that with astrology too, as there's a whole range of potential and possibility. And let's just talk about the houses in astrology. And with the houses, there are several realms of experience that each house could point to. And for any given person, only one of them might be resonant. Let's say there's 5, with any given house. And, sometimes there's more. Well, depending on who you talk to, there's an infinite number, but let's just imagine, for instance, to have a little parameter here, that there's 5 meanings. And for a specific client, one of those meanings might be really resonant and the other 4 might not be resonant at all. And so part of using intuition, I think, with tarot and astrology is also about finding the thing that is resonant for that person that also fits within the parameter of meaning. So for instance, like in astrology, there's 12 houses, and we're not being so squirrely and open-ended that we're going to grab one of the meanings from one of the other houses to make it fit the 5th house. the fifth house has a set of meanings, and we want to stay in color in between the lines in that way. But within that range, there's a, you know, I don't know, I use the coloring idea there. There's a lot of colors you can use that are still going to fit in that container. And it's about being open to finding the resonance with the person. And what I find in consultations, and I found this in the very beginning of my practice as a baby astrologer, that if you're open, you'll find it. If you're open in the moment, you'll find it, you know, and you develop skill at that over time. And part of it, though, is about, I like the word open, because it's about being open to go in the direction that you're being guided to go in. Part of that is coming through what you're hearing the client say. So part of it's coming from reading the room, reading the field. And part of it's coming from internal directives that you get that we, in this form that we call intuition. And so I think it's really important to, whether you're a tarot reader or an astrologer, to separately develop intuitive skills. You know, either classes you can take. There's a class for everything these days. So get online and take an online class about developing your intuition. And as part of that process, it's important to find your version of intuition, because it's not the same. It's not one size fits all with intuition. You know, each person's going to receive information from the field in very different ways. For myself, it's just direct knowing, right? I don't know why, but I'm being guided to talk about a tennis ball right now. It's just like, I just know certain things. It just comes into my mind, and I just know. For other people, they'll see images, they'll hear voices, they'll feel something, they'll see colors, and there's so many other experiences that people have with intuition. So it's just about finding what yours is, and then developing that, growing it. It's just like a muscle, you know, working it out so that you learn how to recognize it. Like in me, I know when a piece of information is intuition versus just something I know in my head. You know, there's a, and that just comes from practice.
So interesting. So, I mean, have there been times where the intuition has seemed to be like, it came up as if it was something totally like independent of the exchange going on between you and the client? It's kind of like, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is like, I mean, are there times when the intuition comes in maybe like in the form of a secretless or an invisible, let's say, I'm going to use a word we use in astrology, a daemon, an invisible daemon. You're a daemon.
Yeah.
You know, does it sometimes happen like that?
There can be a sense of it not necessarily making sense in terms of the context that we're in right now, right? Like I might pick up a piece of information that, you know, we're talking about their kids, and then I pick up some piece of information that doesn't seem related to the conversation. What I've learned over time, though, is to even trust the timing of when I'm receiving the information and to just convey it for what it's worth. And often I use that phrase, you know, for what it's worth, I'm picking up this image of X, Y, and Z, or I'm being drawn to talk about this topic. Does that mean anything to you? And every time, every single time, the person says, yeah, that's so weird that you brought up the tennis ball because, and then they're off on a story where the tennis ball is somehow really meaningful to them. And over time, you have to learn to kind of get out of your own way and to trust in the process. And you know, I can imagine that there could be times when I'm drawn to talk about a tennis ball. I just wanted to throw it out there because I've had this experience before where I get an image and it's been resonant with people. If it's not, it's no big deal, but I just wanted to throw it out there. And maybe the person says, actually, that doesn't make any sense, but let's just move on. And you know, what can happen in the moment in readings or consultations is that the person goes away and has time to reflect on it, and they get back to you later and they're like, actually, I thought about the tennis ball thing and it wasn't coming to me in the moment, but here's how it is important. And that kind of thing can happen as well. But also hold space for, you know, maybe it didn't make sense to them in the moment. And I just trust that there's a reason that these things come to mind. And also, again, like it is like a muscle that you can develop and work out over time. And you learn, you can learn to trust in the process. You can learn to recognize what your process is. And then second step is to trust it, so that when it does come up, you know, you share it, because you've got, you know, 10, 15, 20 experiences of I shared this thing and it did go somewhere. And then you develop more confidence in it. And then if you have an experience where it doesn't land, it's no big deal, because you're like, okay, 19 out of 20 experiences, I trusted that in myself and it went somewhere important. And this one time it didn't make sense. And if that happens, my advice is let it go, but also trust that maybe there's a meaning or resonance that neither of you could understand in the moment, but that it had meaning in some other way, right? That there may have been some reason for it that you just can't figure out at the time.
That's so interesting, because it brings in the topic of synchronicity as well, which is a huge part of any tarot reading as well, you know, because like when you're doing the tarot, you have to be aware of the magic that's in time and space itself, because somehow you're getting the message. I mean, a good deal of the message is from higher sources of knowledge that you connect to when you're doing the reading. And so that's all part of the fabric of time and space, and kind of mysteriously connected events, right, that bring you eventually face to face with the client you're reading for, you know? So in that sense, I think, you know, tarot is a magical experience, but so can astrology. Astrology can also be a really magical experience.
Absolutely.
And another question I had in mind is, I mean, first of all, would you say there are charts that are just maybe more challenging to kind of decipher than others, you know, based on learned meanings and learned interpretations, right? Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. And there are charts that are harder than others just in the moment for you, right? Like in another time, in another space, you've looked at that aspect before and it's made sense to you. And all of a sudden you're staring at it with this particular client who's showing up, and you're like, I don't even know what to say about this, or something about, you know, I know what to say about that aspect, but in this particular context, it's really not making sense to me. And when that happens, I encourage people to do two things. One, it's possible that you're seeing something in that person's psyche that doesn't make sense to them in their psyche. Like if you can't get it to dance together into some kind of meaning, maybe they can't either. And if you describe that, that might be resonant. Like I have this sense that there's this energy inside you where there might be this question of this versus that, or, you know, that's one direction you can go in. Part two, or I guess another direction I go with that experience is that might happen in preparation, but as soon as you're sitting with somebody, you know, 9 times out of 10, the meaning comes to you, or the conversation unfolds in a meaningful way that is resonant with that thing that you didn't think you could understand, and suddenly you do, because of the context that they're bringing, or just the energy of that person, just sitting with them. And so that's another place where I encourage people to trust in the process, and don't push against the thing that isn't working or making sense, and instead go follow the flow where there is meaning, or there is sense, or where you do have something to say. Or, you know, I encourage, where as you know, we teach in our program how to ask interesting questions that are chart-based questions for the client. So questions for the client that are based specifically on their chart. So it's not just any random question. It's a question that's already going to be really resonant for that person, because you've got a window into, you know, as we were talking about earlier, there's a set of meanings that are, it's not like the sky's the limit. There's a specific set of meanings, right?
Right. No, thank you so much for that. And I'm gonna, before I hand over the mic to Sharon,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question that I don't know, might be controversial, maybe not. So, so in astrology, we often talk about elements, some elements as being more relatable to intuition than others, right? And I'm thinking here particularly of water and fire, right? And sometimes we talk about certain, in addition to the elements, certain planets, like if they're maybe certain outer planets like Neptune, or even like more, but inner planets like the moon, if they're very pronounced, they might give someone like an intuitive edge, let's say, right? So would you say that maybe perhaps like in some cases, if as an astrologer, you have certain placements in the charts, in your chart, right, that are often associated with intuition, that might give you a kind of intuitive edge when it comes time to read for someone?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I also think that we all have access to intuition, and it's about finding what yours looks like. And for a really rationally minded, or a person, I think of it this way, actually, a person who thinks they're really rationally minded and objective, because we all have a moon, we all have a Venus, we all have planets that open us to connection with others, and we all have a Neptune to other realms of experience. And so it's about finding our way there in our specific way. For some of us, like the door to the other realm is wide open, and we know that from a young age, and we're just like, talking to the fairies in the woods, and we're totally there, and for others of us, we think there are no fairies, and we're going down a different road. But we can all find a road to that intuitive capacity inside ourselves, I believe. And yet I do want to acknowledge that there are certain symbols that might describe somebody who that doorway is a bit more open for. But even for those with the open doorway, our conditioning and our experience in the world can shut that down. Could have us afraid of it. I know I have friends who are mediums, and a lot of folks who have that experience describe at an early age. They start hearing from people from the other side in various ways, and they don't know what to do with that. And they talk to their mom about it, and maybe their mom's not a medium and is like, maybe you shouldn't talk to those spirits, and we shut down that part of ourselves. But astrology can kind of tell us, there's a potential here to develop that if you want to, or if you're not already aware of it. So it does give us some clues about some latent, or maybe not latent, talents that people have in specific areas. And that's one of them.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Sharon, I'm sure you have many questions you're burning to ask.
I was talking to the computer. I was answering the whole time, like, yes, that was fantastic.
That's great.
It was really hard for me when I first learned astrology, because one of my instructors was like, you don't ever use intuition. It's science, damn it. So I've been doing tarot since I was wee bitty, since I was a teenager. So to me, intuition is just part of who I am and what I do. It's just, I don't breathe without intuition. And for a while I fought it doing the astrology, but then I realized for me it was each piece of it, each type of energy, whether it's a sign or a house or a planet, or even the cardinal, fixed, mutable, everything has such a large spectrum. Like nothing is innately good, nothing is innately evil, and there's such a wide spectrum that I ended up having to use my intuition to be able to understand each individual's chart. So it was really good to hear you with, your own university being able to hear that it's okay to use my intuition and to experiment and discover. I always stay within the spectrum of that energy. It's
Right.
completely different with the tarot cards, or say with crystals. It's a totally different type of intuition, but it stays within the spectrum of the science, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, when I'm teaching this to students, I say, as we use our intuition, we're not turning Mars into Venus. Like we don't want to color that far outside the lines. We still want to stay in the realm of what Mars might mean. But one phrase that I feel like I've picked up from a wonderful book called Cosmos and Psyche that I repeat constantly is that the universe is unfolding anew in every moment. And that includes the archetypes, the archetypal fields that the planets represent and those experiences. And so with Venus, here's what we know about Venus to date. Blah, 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 blah. It's this and it's that and it's the other thing. But Venus is unfolding anew in every moment as well. And so I fully expect, as I'm working with clients, that a client will show up for me someday that will teach me something new about Venus that I don't know yet, but that I can recognize as Venusian. And as soon as I hear it and see it, I'm like, oh, that's Venus too, right? Mm-hmm. And it's part of that field, but it might be something a little bit new in some way. So, and again, it's like it's the thing about once you learn how to play the scales, you can improvise. It's the same thing with astrology and tarot. We don't want to recognize something that we put in the Venus field that's really belongs to another planet. And so you do need to learn what those containers look like so that when you do see something new, you're like, okay, which container does that go in? Oh, it totally fits in this container because I know that container really well. And this totally fits with those other things.
I do have a question for you. And I had a student the other night and we were talking about Saturn, and I was talking about this chart we were reading. I thought the Saturn was lovely. It was like the saving grace in his chart. It was just amazing. And she said, but I thought that Saturn was just bad, that it was all challenges. I was like, that's not what I taught you.
Right.
So how do you, when you get somebody, or a lot of us, I even do it sometimes with certain things, when you get stuck in a rut, like Venus means this, or every time I think about Mars, I go straight for aggression.
Right.
How would you help somebody break out of that to use their intuition to go to the vastness of what it could be instead of being stuck into that niche of one thing?
Yeah, for most of us, the clients teach us that. So over time, you'll have a range of experience with clients where, let's say early on in your practice, you've zeroed in on 3 things about Mars that have been easy for you to memorize for some reason. Conflict is one that a lot of people will go for. And somebody comes in and they've got Mars square whatever or opposite whatever, and you say, oh, you probably experience a lot of conflict. And the person goes, well, not really. And then you're like, in that moment as a baby astrologer, you're like, oh shit, what do I say now? Because like my go-to thing didn't work. And that's why you need to, even from the beginning, know that there's a whole range of potential with Mars. And okay, so for this person, it's not conflict, but maybe they just have a lot of physical energy and they do martial arts, right? And they don't even, in their mind, they're not registering that as conflict because it's something they enjoy doing. But of course, martial arts is acting out conflict physically. But maybe it's not even in the zone of conflict. Maybe they're a runner, a competitive runner, or, there's a bazillion other things that could be Martian and that could reflect that archetype that might not look like conflict to them. So it's about being able to pivot and know where to go next, and just to have that flexibility built in. And then over time, you have so many of those experiences that a client shows up and says, but I thought Saturn was bad. And you say, oh, not always, because I've had these clients who have a similar placement and here's what they did.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that the point you made about, sorry, Sharon, were you going to ask another question?
No, I was just going to say we've got 5 minutes left, so we don't want to keep Tony too much longer, although we keep you all day, dude.
Yeah. No,
we can do it again another time if that works out for you guys.
That would be lovely, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we'd love that, of course, yeah. Now, I was just going to say the point you made about, the possibility of actually discovering a new facet of a planet that supposedly are the already well known, right, in an individual consultation. I think that has very profound philosophical implications for astrology in general, you know, and for especially for the conflict between that, you know, the perceived conflict between traditional and modern approaches to astrology, because the traditionalists will say, oh, these planets are just so far, or they're too new for us to have enough like a field experience to say what they mean, right?
Yeah.
But then even if the planets that have been known for the last 4,000 years in astrology, let's say, even if they can manifest new meanings as time goes on, then there's no argument to say that, oh no, we don't know enough about Uranus or Neptune or Pluto to kind of really to integrate them in a fundamental way in our approach, you know?
Right.
So I think it's a really profound point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Of course, and the other thing about new planetary bodies, and I think Pluto is still relatively new, as we discovered it in 1930 and hasn't even been 100 years yet. And a lot of people speak about Pluto as if they really understand it. And I think that's fine, and maybe they do. And I'm not questioning that they do or don't. But with any, with any new planetary body, just because it's new doesn't mean that we shouldn't start, right? Like I'm thinking about really newer bodies like Chiron or Eris or Orcus, or, you know, there are other planetary bodies out there with Pluto that we should arguably be working with. And we have to start somewhere, right? And what's important with the really, really new ones is just to stay open, but also to convey that openness when we're talking about them. You know, if we choose to talk about them with a client, for instance, we might want to say something like, you know, there's this planetary body that's really, I'm really curious about in your chart, because as you're describing it, it kind of fits with what some folks have been saying about it. And you might say, you know, this is really new, so we're all kind of working it out as we go, but I'd love to ask you some questions just to see, so that I can maybe learn something about it in this moment. And as long as you hold that openness and don't come across as like, oh, you know, this planetary body that we discovered last week has a name from this particular myth, and so this is what it means, right? As long as we're not dogmatic, then, you know, it's fair game. And you know, I think it's important to hold openness with all of the planets, like I said, because everything's unfolding anew. But the newer the planet, the more open we should be, I think.
I needed to hear that, because I fight with Khalid about those newer planets. I'm like, because it's like, yeah, okay, it's named Pluto, so I get all kinds of bent out of shape, but I will go forward trying to be open-minded.
Right. Well, you know, and there's something to be said about keeping your toolkit small, and I highly advocate that. But for those of us who are curious and interested, and you know, if that's you, throw some of those extra symbols in there and start learning on your own by talking to people and asking questions.
I do believe that they exert energy. They've been there all the while. We just haven't recognized it. I just don't think that we're there yet. So I wasn't playing with them, but it would be fun to be part of getting there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, if that's you, and you know, it's you, if you're like, oh my gosh, if I have to throw one more symbol in there, my head's going to explode, you know, so, and that's okay too, you know, because the small toolkit works, and, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Oh, this was fantastic. I think we better let you go though.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys, and I love the subject. So thanks for inviting me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank
for coming
you.
on. Just again to reiterate, so for anyone interested in learning astrology in a very rich way, at a very deep level, please go to www.astrologyuniversity.com. They offer a la carte courses, you know, you can just kind of handpick things you want, or you can enroll in their fabulous four-year diploma program, as I'm happily doing now. And for to learn more about Tony, you can go to www.theastrologycoach.com. I'm assuming this is your latest webpage, right? Am I right?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not really doing private consults these days. I do a little bit of group work, and that's about it.
But we're
Okay,
going to make him
okay,
late
good.
to his next appointment.
Right. But thanks for the invite, Khalid, and it's been a pleasure. And
Thank you for coming. It's been
I
delightful.
look
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Yeah. All right.
It was a pleasure
Okay. Take
meeting
care.
you.
All right, bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for engaging with us. Please like, subscribe and share. To book a personal, in-depth reading and to learn more about our incredible courses in tarot and astrology, please visit our website www.thepomegranate.grove.com.